social justice organization Open Secrets has pointed out that the people behind corruption and economic crimes are seldom brought to justice. In a country like South Africa, where inequality is rife, funds that could uplift the vulnerable are often diverted. This is towards a criminal activity. I'm joined now by Phather, who's an investigator at Open Secrets. Raisa, good evening to you. Thanks for your time tonight. And the book that you've recently launched as Open Secrets, The Unaccountables, is such a brilliant book. But let me give you a chance to tell us a bit more about it.
Hi, thank you so much for having us today. The Unaccountables basically tracks 50 years of private sector corruption in South Africa. It looks at the auditing sector, it looks at the lawyers, the banks, many of the big industries in the private sector who have contributed towards corruption from apartheid to now, to state capture. And essentially the point that we're trying to make is that we can't talk about corruption without talking about how the private sector steals from the public. And we also try to say that actually there are ways to hold the private sector to account, that they're not too big for justice, and that we can in fact do things to improve the private sector so that it works better for the public.
The impression that one often gets is that private sector corruption is very often misunderstood, not as easily identifiable as corruption in the public sector, and a lot more difficult to prosecute than, again, what we see in the public sector. I mean, are those just myths and narratives that have been put out there to excuse why we don't see accountability where the private sector is concerned?
Yes, I mean, I definitely think it is a myth. And I think one of the origins of this myth is from the judicial systems themselves. So, for example, if we look at the National Prosecuting Authority in South Africa, the NPA often says we don't have the skills to prosecute complex financial crimes. And often, you know, what we see is that companies are held accountable through out-of-court settlements, which in fact is just absorbed as fines, the cost of doing business. It doesn't really punish and tell the private sector to stop doing these crimes. We offer ways in which the private sector can be held accountable through improving regulatory bodies such as IRBA, which regulates the auditors, and also through saying that, you know, institutions like the LPC should be doing better to regulate lawyers. And then we say, of course, that there should be prosecutions because the law does exist to prosecute companies. We're just not using it effectively enough.
Raisa, you also go a step further in that, you know, in some instances, you're naming and shaming some of the organizations that have been complicit, which, again, is not something that we see often.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, often you see on TV, you see your Jacob Zuma, you see the Guptas, you see Brian Molefe, but you don't see the faces behind McKinsey or Bain. And we are very clear to point out who the individuals are at these companies and to point out the companies themselves. And this is important because in the public eye, we need to see who the people are who are stealing from the public purse. We need to know who these companies are. Because I think once the public becomes familiar with them, it becomes easier to understand that we can hold them to accountable, that they're not beyond reproach. And that's why we took this stance. We took it in this book, and we've also taken it in the reports that we've published, particularly the Wanted report this year, which focuses on state capture. And I think one of the most effective ways that we can see the sense of showing and naming and shaming these private individuals is through PRASA, for example, because it's there where you see the private individuals and companies who stole from the public purse, and as a result, we don't have a functioning railway system.
Just to wrap it up, then, it means that your research is watertight because you must be fully aware of the implications of what it means to put people's names out there associated with malfeasance, corruption of the scale.
No, absolutely. This book has been in the works for more than 5 years. And everything that we've done is meticulously researched, and the sources are identified in the book. We have a very comprehensive reference list which readers can refer to. And we do this because we want to put reliable information in the public sphere. We understand that disinformation is rife. There are various debates happening within the public sphere, but we've made sure that this information is clearly set out who is responsible for private sector corruption in the country.
Raisa Phather, let me thank you for your time. And she's with Open Secrets. The title of the book is The Unaccountables. It is available at all good bookstores. Stephen?